Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into a case today that really, I think, shook everyone up when it happened. And it's really kind of stayed with us. And it brings up a lot of questions about, responsibility as a community and as individuals.
Mm.
The murder of Kitty Genovese.
Yeah, it's one of those cases it's really just stuck in our minds as like a society. It brings up, questions about human nature and about society itself.
For sure. And, the story that really kind of took hold of everyone's imagination is the story of the 38 witnesses who didn't do anything as Kitty Genovese was being murdered. But the full picture, it's not that simple. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
So let's unpack it. So imagine it's a late winter night in Queens, New York. It's quiet, and then all of a sudden you hear a woman screams. A young woman, Kitty Genovese, is attacked just outside her apartment building, and she cries for help. You can hear her voice echoing in the streets, and a few lights flicker on in nearby apartments. A couple windows open, and for a second the attacker is startled and he hides in the shadows. But then it goes quiet. All you can hear is Kitty's trying to catch her breath as she tries to get to her building, and then the attacker comes back. And he attacks her again. And finally Kitty doesn't make another sound. And later, everyone would find out that multiple neighbors had heard her screaming. Some even saw parts of the attack, but no one was able to get there in time to help her.
Right.
Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series.
What's really interesting about this case is that it's not just about a horrible crime, it's about how people reacted to it or how they didn't react to it. It makes us wonder, why didn't anyone do anything to help her? Were they just not interested? Did they not care? Or is there something else going on?
Yeah. So let's go back and talk about Kitty Genovese for a minute. Who was she before all this happened?
She was a young woman, 28 years old, trying to make a life for herself in New York City, worked hard, loved life, and she had dreams for the future.
It's just awful to think about, all those dreams being taken away from her.
Yeah.
And it makes it even more important to understand what happened to her that night.
Absolutely. To really understand everything that happened that night, we need to talk about March 13th, 1964, the night Kitty was killed.
Okay. So what happened that night?
Well, it was early morning. Kitty was coming home from work. She was a bar manager. And as she was walking to her apartment, a man came up to her, Winston Moseley, 29 years old. And he had a history of violence. Sadly, this wasn't just random. He went after her specifically.
It's scary to think that someone would do that. To plan to hurt someone like that? What happened next?
Moseley attacked Kitty. He stabbed her over and over again. She fought back. You can just imagine how terrified she must have been, hoping someone would hear her and come help.
It's hard to even imagine what she went through. But you said earlier that some people did hear her.
Yeah, that's where things get a little confusing. A few neighbors heard the noise. Some of them even looked out their windows. One man even yelled out his window and scared Moseley away for a little bit.
So someone did try to help.
Yeah, but it didn't last long. The man yelling scared Moseley off, but he didn't go far. This is one of those details that people forget. It wasn't like everyone was just sitting there watching and doing nothing. It was really chaotic and scary, happening in the dark. There were moments when people tried to help, but then it would get quiet again.
So it wasn't as simple as most people think.
Exactly. It's not like they were all just heartless and ignoring her. Things were happening quickly, and it was dark. And maybe people didn't understand what was really happening?
So what happened after Moseley ran off the first time? Did no one go check on Kitty?
That's the saddest part. Moseley came back. And Kitty had been hurt, and she was confused. She'd collapsed by her building. And Moseley attacked her again. And that's when she died.
It's just so sad. It makes you wonder if someone had gone to check on her after that first attack. Maybe she would have lived.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of people think about, and it's one of the reasons people are still talking about this case. It makes you wonder, would I have done anything? Would I have helped?
It really makes you think about how people act in a crisis.
Exactly. And that's what we call the bystander effect. Psychologists started studying this a lot after what happened to Kitty Genovese. They wanted to understand why sometimes when there are a lot of people around, no one helps.
That's interesting. But before we talk about it, let's talk about what happened to Winston Moseley. Was he caught?
He was. But it gets even worse. 6 days after he killed Kitty, he was arrested. But not for killing her. He was caught doing something else.
What happened?
The police were investigating a burglary, and they caught Moseley in the act. And when they questioned him, he admitted to the burglary. But then he also admitted to killing Kitty, and to 2 other murders, and to raping several women.
That's horrible. So
Yeah.
Kitty wasn't the only one he hurt.
No. It makes what happened to Kitty even more tragic knowing how dangerous he was.
So what happened at his trial?
Well, he had confessed, and there was a lot of evidence against him, so he was convicted of killing Kitty, and he was sentenced to death. But later that was changed to life in prison.
Life in prison for taking so many lives. It's hard to feel like justice was served.
I know. And there's still so much to talk about, so many things to think about. This case really changed how we think about things like responsibility and community, and about human nature.
And we're going to talk about all that as we continue our deep dive. We'll be back after a quick break.
Okay, so we talked about what happened to Kitty Genovese, and how people didn't really understand what was happening at the time. But still, why didn't more people do something to help her, even when they knew something bad was happening?
Yeah, that's really the question, isn't it? It's what makes this case so interesting and so disturbing. It makes us think about ourselves and how we would act. And like you mentioned earlier, I think the bystander effect is a big part of this.
It is. After Kitty Genovese was killed, two psychologists named Bibb Latané and John Darley started studying this. They wanted to figure out why people are less likely to help someone if there are other people around.
So the more people there are, the less likely anyone is to help. But wouldn't more people mean there are more people who could potentially help?
You'd think so, right? But there are a few reasons why it doesn't work that way. One reason is something called the diffusion of responsibility. It's like, imagine you're carrying something heavy, like a big bucket of water, and someone comes up to you and helps you carry it. So now the weight is shared. It's easier for both of you. Now imagine 5 people are all holding this bucket together. Each person has to do a lot less work. It's the same with helping someone. If there are a lot of people around, everyone feels less responsible for doing something.
Oh, okay. So it's like everyone thinks someone else will take care of it.
Right. People tell themselves, oh, someone else probably already called the police. Or someone else will know what to do. And no one wants to look like they're overreacting. Especially in a big city where there are lots of people around. It's easy to just blend in and not do anything.
But wouldn't people realize this is serious? I mean, a woman is being attacked.
You would hope so. But the thing is, people also look to other people to see how to act. So if no one else seems worried, then maybe it's not that big of a deal. People start to doubt themselves. Maybe they think, oh, maybe it's just a couple fighting. Or maybe it's not as bad as it sounds. And when things are happening fast and it's dark and people don't have all the information, it's easy to misunderstand what's happening, like that night with Kitty Genovese.
So it's like people's natural instincts to follow the crowd can stop them from helping someone. And back then, no one even knew about this bystander effect.
Right. What happened to Kitty Genovese, even though a lot of people didn't get the whole story, it really helped us understand this. People started doing research. And Latané and Darley, those psychologists I mentioned, they did some really interesting experiments to see how people act in these situations.
So people learned something good from this tragedy. Can you give us an example of one of the experiments?
Sure. In one of their most famous experiments, they had people talk to each other using an intercom, but they couldn't actually see each other. And one of the people on the intercom pretended to have a seizure, and they found that if someone thought they were the only one who could hear this person having a seizure, they were more likely to go get help. But if they thought other people were listening too, they were less likely to do anything.
Oh, wow. So even just thinking other people were there made a difference. That's really interesting.
It is, and a lot of other research showed the same thing. So this bystander effect, it's not about people being mean or not caring. It's about how our minds work and how other people can affect how we act.
So this is all really fascinating. But what does it mean for us today? Did anything change because of what happened to Kitty Genovese? Like, do we do anything differently now when there are emergencies?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Kitty's death, even though a lot of this story people know isn't completely accurate, it really made people change things. It made people realize that we need to do a better job of helping each other when something bad happens. And it led to some big changes in how we respond to emergencies.
This is the part I've been waiting for. I bet our listeners are really interested to hear what changed because of this awful event. So tell us what's different now. So the bystander effect explains why people sometimes freeze up in a crisis. But you said that Kitty Genovese's case led to some real changes. Like what?
Well, one of the biggest changes was 9/11.
Really? 9/11 came about because of this case.
It did. Before 1968, there wasn't one number you could call for any emergency.
Wow, I never knew that. 911 seems so basic now.
I know, right? But that's how powerful this case was. It made people realize that the old system wasn't working. People didn't know who to call. And calls took too long to get to the right people, especially when every second mattered.
So 911 was created because of what happened to Kitty Genovese.
Yeah. People saw that we needed one number that everyone knew, a number that would get you help fast. And it saved so many lives. It's amazing to think about how something so good came out of something so awful.
Yeah, it really shows that even from a tragedy, we can learn and make things better.
Exactly. And it wasn't just 9/11. Kitty Genovese's case made people think differently about their responsibility to each other. Like, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? Do we have a duty to help people even if we don't know them?
Yeah, it's like it forced people to really think about how we treat each other.
Right. And it showed us that we can't just think about ourselves. We're all connected. And we need to look out for one another. The research on the bystander effect showed us that it's easy to just stand by and do nothing. But it also showed us that we can choose to be different. We can choose to help.
So it's not enough to just know to call 911. We need to be willing to actually do something to help.
Yes. We need to pay attention. We need to care about other people. And we need to be brave enough to step up when someone needs us. I think that's Kitty Genovese's legacy. Even though her story is really sad, it reminds us that we can all make a difference.
That's a really important message, and I think it's something we all need to remember, especially today when it's easy to get caught up in our own lives and forget about other people.
I agree. Kitty Genovese's story is a reminder that we have a choice. We can be indifferent, or we can be courageous.
And we should all choose to be courageous. Well, this has been a really powerful conversation. Thank you so much for helping us understand the Kitty Genovese case and everything it means.
It was my pleasure. It's so important to talk about these things and to remember that we all have the power to make the world a better place.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey. If you're interested in hearing more stories like this, make sure to follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle. And check out our YouTube channel too. Until next time, stay safe and remember, we can all make a difference.